Five.
What's
Let
up?
let us see. So, can anybody in the comments write if you guys see us? That would be very interesting to see.
Yes, I can see
Yes.
everybody in there.
Oh yes. Let's just see. We're waiting for Matt to join as well, who will be hosting this. And then we got Chris here. Perfect. Hey guys. Great. Sorry for being a
Nice.
few minutes late. We're trying to get the
Technical difficulties. Multiple countries at once trying to join forces here.
me and Matt were typing on the side trying to saying this like it feels like start of COVID back all over again trying to figure out the tech.
Yeah, yeah.
So Chris, where are you calling in from now?
I am calling in from Iceland's West Fjord, so I'm like out in the middle of nowhere. I'm actually in a friend's cabin right now, like in an old like rustic home in literally the middle of nowhere, like at the end of a fjord. He just happened to have good Wi-Fi, so I made it work, and yeah, here we are.
That is looks amazing. So and
What
then
about what
we
about you?
got
What about where are you?
we're calling in from Stockholm, so this is where the
Nice.
marketing department for DB
Hmm.
sits.
Yeah.
I just came home. Same thing. We had shitty Wi-Fi at the office, so ran home to try to figure this out.
Hmm.
And then we have our social media and community manager. He's also trying to pop on the live stream together with us. He's
Hmm.
somewhere in between Slovenia and Croatia
Yeah.
with poor internet. And then
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
guess we have Matt from Looking Sideways trying to pop on from the UK somewhere. So we'll see what
It
happens.
it's hilarious to me that like I found good Wi-Fi out in the middle of the West Fjords at the tip of a fjord, and those guys are like in metropolis cities and can't get it together. But that's life,
It's
it happens.
it is the funniest. I'm just gonna see what everybody's writing over here in the chat trying to get it. It's not working for Matt. Say hello to the crowds. So it's super fun to see all of you here. It's for the first time we
Mm.
actually try YouTube Live. All times before we've always hosted this on Google Meets. We tried to keep it a little bit more private, but it's super
Mhm.
fun that we can actually now try YouTube Lives and see how that works.
Cool.
Before we kind of pop on, I would love to hear we've seen where everybody's from. We have Felipe. You've been here multiple times now, calling in from Ericeira.
Yeah.
We have Nate
Barcelona,
from
Peru,
So Sick.
Norway. Sick.
I would love to hear as well in the comments here. What do you guys work with, and what's your favorite? What should we do, Chris? What they work with, and what more questions should we pop in there?
Are you talking about camera system, or are you talking about like what kind of work do people do?
What kind of work they do, and their
Mm.
favorite ice cream. I would love to hear in the comments to just get people in there to see.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Here we have
Let's see.
Andrea. I'd love to hear as well how many people have been on here before because I see quite a few names that have been on these calls before. While we're waiting, Tin is saying should be fixed any minute, but we can start, Chris. So please tell
Let's
us
do it.
about like what are you up? What's up in the West Fjords, and what brought you there this time?
So I just finished like a month worth of work. Basically, I was touring a film in in Denver, and then I was up in Canada, Vancouver, Toronto, and did a couple stops. Just and so after that, came back to Iceland, did like an 8-day shoot along the south coast, and yeah, I came up to the West Fjords for a little bit of R&R, a little bit of me time, which I find to be like really critical. I actually I really value the idea that like when we are on these projects or on shoots or we're whatever we're doing for work, you're giving a lot of yourself. Oftentimes, you're trying to kind of either entertain people or entertain clients, or just you're taking from that deep well you have of inspiration. And I think that at a certain point that runs a little dry, and you need to find time to like fill your cup back up. And so you don't get burned out. I think that some of the questions and comments that I kind of saw prior to this, we started this, was people asking like, how do you deal with burnout? And so for me, usually it looks like getting offline, and maybe backlogging some things that I could share and just having some time for me. No phone, nothing like that. It's really important to me. So yeah, I come up here because there is a lack of service. There's a lack of people. That's important. And yeah, I try to like remind myself, rekindle what I love about what I do. And that's, I think, a critical part of finding success and finding new creativity.
Yeah, and then since we last spoke, you've actually moved your family to Iceland. You kind of immerse yourself even more in that country and
Yeah.
that culture that you love. And how has that kind of changed your relationship with Iceland as a country, its
Yeah.
culture, its people,
Mhm.
and which I guess you feel such deep love and affinity for.
Yeah, I got to give a shout out to James Bowden, really talented photographer, amazing creative, somebody who I look up to a lot
Oh,
in the
James is
comment in
here.
yeah, in the comments there. James, actually, it's funny because I've been to Iceland like 80 plus times, and obviously I moved here. I moved my family here, I moved my whole life here, but before I ever came to the West Fjords, James did a trip here. I think he was climbing and surfing, and I had never been here, and I saw his photos, and I was like, "Holy shit, this place is special." And so yeah, he inspired me big time. And but to answer your question, to be fair and to be honest, um, I love California. I love the States. It's home. It's where I'm from. But I wanted my kids to grow up with a little more freedom and a little more independence. And I think that I grew up that way in California, in a small town, and it's just not the same. And so I wanted them to be in a place where I felt like they could just be a little more wild. And that's really what drove us here. Like I would have moved to Iceland 10 years ago. I love Scandi culture. I love, me. I love Norway. I love Sweden. I love black licorice. I'm a big fan of all those things. But I think that culturally, there's something about Icelandic people that really drew me in. The landscape drew me in. And I also felt like I was doing myself a disservice by trying to just constantly go to new places. I felt like I wasn't telling like the most real stories. And I think that the more you go back to places that mean something to you, the more you get involved with environmental initiatives, the more you understand the issues they're facing, the more you respect the people, the culture, the more the landscapes give to you. And so I feel like I've been able to produce some of my best work here. And yes, I can't always be working here, but moving to Iceland was an opportunity for me to be in Europe more. So I've been able to go to London and do events and go to, spend time in the UK and spend time in outer Europe. And I think that that access is amazing. And also too, like accessing, sorry, the Eastern US, New York, North Carolina, South Carolina, just being able to go to those places where normally that would be like a big flight for me from California. So I think that this is just a different stage of life. And I have always been trying to be very aware of like when I get a call to do something, to not be afraid. I mean, I basically uprooted my whole business, my whole life in order to make this happen. And it's not easy because I think that most people would say, well, you kind of had things set up in California. Life looked really good and it was really good, but I just wanted something different and I had to answer that call.
I get it. And how's it now? I guess you're working even more now between split time zones, but I guess that is even easier. Or how do you handle that with kind of like needing to respond even more now around the clock to things? Or yeah,
Dude,
how's that going out with the
it's
studio?
never easy. I mean, it's funny because now, like, so I have employees back in the States and I have an office in California still because we do a lot of work in the States. So right around 3 p.m. Iceland time, GMT, the phone starts vibrating and emails start flowing in. But what I love about it is like it sort of forces me into like a 4 hour workday where between 3 and like 7, I kind of focus my time on work. And then, 7 p.m., it's like family time. That's it. That's all I'm doing. And before that, like the morning and into the day, that's my time. I go ride my bike, I'll go ski, I'll go do whatever. And I think that living in a place where, there is a ski hill like 15 minutes from town that's open till 9 p.m. In the winter, like we've talked about this a bunch. It's such a interesting part of the culture where like after work, there'll be a rush to go to the hill and like go cross country ski. I love that part about the culture. You embrace being outside no matter
Yeah.
what the weather, no matter what's happening.
No, and I feel you. I think that's what I love with Sweden. What's fun, even
Yeah.
going to Norway, because they're even more fanatic. But it's just this like
Yeah.
getting outside of soon as you're finished with work, just like it's me time, it's mountain time. We got to get
Yeah.
out.
And this
And
may be like a slightly, unpopular opinion in some ways, but I genuinely feel like specifically Scandinavian countries, they really value their outside time. And it's prevalent in how long of breaks they take in summer, what they do with those breaks, the time they spend with their family. And I want to like emulate that and be an example that there's a way to like embrace that, you know.
no, it's super interesting. I also want to remind, like, if you guys have questions, please pop them into
Yeah,
the comments.
bring them
I know
up.
that Matt, who um, who was supposed to host this before, kind of we took over because we are having troubles to get him in. He asked a bunch of questions in his
Mhm,
Substack, so I think we're gonna answer and ask a few of those. But if you guys have any questions during today's call, let me know and we'll take them up. Um,
mhm.
it was one question that a lot of people have on this call that came up on the Substack that Matt was kind of put into the 2 hour chat.
Yeah.
And it's from Evan, and he said, firstly, he had two questions, but firstly, what do you say is the most important factor that pushed your career into the realm
Mm.
of being, a sought after professional?
Yeah. I think that it's pretty simple, but it was being a specialist. So there was a time when I think a lot of people that were in sort of my field were trying to kind of get the attention of ad agencies and get the attention of brands by showing them that they could do everything, and
Yeah,
I'm going to use some examples here that aren't maybe relevant, but like they can shoot portraits and action and underwater and wildlife and wedding photography and yada yada yada, and that's excellent. I totally love that. That's a beautiful skill set, but I don't think that that's why you're hired by companies. You're often hired because you are really, really, really good at one thing. And of course, you spend time, you work on portfolios to build other facets of your work, but typically you're kind of sought after because of that one specialty. It's similar to, my friend, good example, Paul Nicklin. Like he is the wildlife photographer when it comes to like underwater and Arctic animals, right? So that's his
yeah.
specialty. And you don't really hire Paul for portraits. And I think that that's benefited me. It's also hurt me in some ways. I will say that because if you can't kind of do it all, then that becomes challenging. But I feel like what's been valuable is I have always really tried to be hired because I'm bringing something creative to the table. I'm not just hired because I have a camera and I know how to use it, right? That's
Yeah.
like maybe almost the worst thing that can happen because then the relationship with you and the client is more about you having a camera and knowing how to use it, and that's it. They don't care about your creativity. They don't care what you're bringing to the table. And so I think the people that inspire me are oftentimes the people that are really good at something, and that can be a broad thing, editorial photography, shooting, you know, um, portraits, kind of in environment portraits, or even like film. There are genres that can be specific, is what I'm saying. And so I
Yeah.
really seek out inspiration from people like that. But that for me was the single most important thing for getting my work in front of clients, and I think pushing me from being like a maybe a talented editorial photographer shooting for magazines to all of a sudden being sought after by companies and brands. And I have built other portfolios, but those are things that I've poured time and money and energy into building up that, aerial photography, underwater photography, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
No, and I feel like we've had 18 of these creative exchanges now with, everything from
And this is the
architects to just,
best one.
and this is the
Just kidding.
best one. But I really feel that whatever the creative field is, I think there's a lot of things I recognize with what you're saying, just about
Mhm,
this, like about specializing and
mhm.
finding what you are known for and what you are
Yeah.
creative for, so people don't hire
Yeah.
you just because you hold the tools, but for
Yeah.
your kind of vision and how
Yeah.
you want to portray the
Well,
portraits.
here's the way I think about it, and this is, sorry, a little sidetrack. And I love these
Yeah,
comments. These questions are great. I'll try to get to some of these. But when as a young outdoor photographer, I remember going to Outdoor Retailer. It was a big like outdoor clothing like kind of event they used to do in Utah, and all the brands were there showing their new line: Arc'teryx, North Face, Patagonia, etc., etc., etc. What I realized very early on was like every single one of these companies, they make the same quality of jacket. They
yeah,
make the same quality of puffy. They make the same quality of rain shell. Like you're not going to buy something from one of them expecting to get wet. So what I'm saying is the barrier of entry is to create a waterproof jacket. So then why do you want to buy from this brand versus that brand? Well, it's because of their identity. It's because of what they stand for. And so I think that the second part of this, right? If the first part is specialization, then
yeah,
the second part, the yin and the yang, the second part is what is your personality that you're bringing to the table? What do you stand for? What is your ethos? What is your mantra? What is your mission statement? I can very clearly identify what Patagonia's mission statement is, which is why so many people feel a resonance with that brand, right? Some of these other brands that maybe don't have that figured out just yet, I think people struggle with, and they struggle to find success. Um, and I think kudos to DB for like their brand and their ethos. All about travel. It's all about exploration. It's all about seeing the world with fresh eyes. But I would say that from a creative standpoint, it's those two things paired together that creates the success.
yeah. No, and I feel it, and I think like that's one of the key things that we worked with. And once you find your ethos, it becomes so much easier also to know, like, should I say yes to this job, or should I say no to this job, or for
Yeah,
us as a brand, like which partnerships are the best, or what products are the best. Like
yeah,
once you find what you believe in and where you want to go, it's easier kind of to find your creative realm, I guess.
yeah, totally.
And then if Evan had another question, then once you're in that realm, how do you design, your career direction so it aligns with your creative direction?
I mean, that's the hardest part, right? You really have to be advocating for yourself because nobody else is going to do that, right? So for me, it looks a lot. I mean, there might be easier ways to do this. I mean, a lot of times people want to know, like, what's the one turnkey thing you did? What's the advice you'd give yourself 20 years ago? And I'm like, I don't know because experience is usually based upon making mistakes,
Yeah,
and learning from those mistakes. And so I've always been a big learn from my own mistakes. And that's just because probably I exhibit a low level of intelligence. But I would say that it's about advocating for yourself. And so what I mean by that is like putting the work out into the world that you want to bring back. And
yeah,
if you're not pouring time or energy or money into doing test shoots or building a portfolio, um, of the types of work you want to shoot, then you can't expect some brand to just randomly hire you because they saw, decent dog photos that you shot to shoot like I don't know, an adventure surf project or something. So in the beginning, that was my lifestyle. Like I was living the lifestyle that I wanted to create in images. And so it
yeah,
felt really easy, because what would be a weekend trip for me would also be something where I was creating good imagery. And I really spent a lot of time. I think that nowadays, fast forwarding, social media gives you the opportunity to kind of push that work out there. Doesn't mean that, everything we see on social media is purely the work that's paying all the bills, because you have to still do stuff that obviously maybe we're not as proud of. But I would say that trying to align that creative vision with kind of
yeah,
work is probably the trickiest thing here. And I think, as I said, just to kind of recap, pouring your time into building the portfolios you want to do so that when the opportunity maybe knocks, you have something to show. I
yeah,
can't tell you how many times, you know, I remember specifically, and just to give a real example of this, I remember coming to Iceland 20 years ago for articles for like Men's Journal and Surfer Magazine, and these were just editorial assignments. I was a low paid editorial photographer shooting for magazines, but every trip I would do, I would stay 2 to 3 days later, and I would spend my own money and my own time to just build a portfolio. Sometimes I'd rent a Land Rover Defender, and it was, super expensive for me at the time. But I would drive it around and shoot, assets that I could put into an automotive portfolio. And so what I'm saying is that when Toyota or GMC or whoever came knocking, I had something to show for it. And that was really critical for me. I think just in terms of investing into myself. And so even if you're like, hey, I'm a wedding photographer and I'm going to this place to shoot this job, doesn't mean that we can't pour our time into kind of expanding our portfolio and shooting other things.
Yeah. And I guess, the next step after that is like once you've kind of, found your specialty and you kind of, started to pour your life into that and build a creative portfolio, then once you get the jobs, how I think a lot of questions that have popped up in different calls of these as well, which I think a lot of people ask is also like, how do you then allow your creativity to shine through when you have clients that have quite strict, briefs and stuff? And how do you balance that of always like, showing up to a job with, you know, your creative vision?
Your
How do you
personality,
yeah,
yeah. And so kind of what you're saying is like you get a brief from a client, which usually looks like a mood board, or it's a series of images they found online that they kind of want to emulate, and then you have maybe a different version of what you'd want to shoot.
yeah,
So there's always some give and take here. I get that. Like I have definitely walked away from photo shoots where I've been like, man, I'm not really that proud of the work that I shot. That's okay. The client's happy, the producers are happy, everybody's happy. Maybe you're not super satisfied, but I think that that's a part of it, right? My
yeah,
thought my thought here is it's not always your career that's going to give you all the joy. And if you're
yeah,
looking for that, if you live by that idea like, "Oh, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life," that's bullshit. Like, "Oh my god," like I I just want to give people permission. It's okay to have an identity crisis a little bit in your career. It's okay to pick up a camera one day and be like, what am I doing with this? Like, maybe this doesn't fulfill me as much. That's all right. I think the key is we still need to seek out things that do fulfill us. And for me, the camera is just a tool. It's a means to tell a story. The storytelling is what fulfills me. Being able to do this fulfills me. Being able to show a film fulfills me. So personal projects are always in the back of my mind. It's always what I'm thinking about. And usually I'm framing it like, well, if this commercial assignment is getting me closer to a personal project, then great. But I just want to say, like, you're not always going to walk away being like, wow, I changed the world with that shoot. Um, I think it's okay to sometimes have a little imposter syndrome. I felt that a lot. I feel that now. Um, just so you know, like it's not something that goes away. And I think the goal is that you really want to aim to work with clients that do understand your creative vision and will give you the opportunity to express it. I think the one like warning red flag I would wave is that sometimes I mean, and don't take offense to this, but sometimes you just aren't good at articulating your vision.
yeah,
So that leads me to another thing. Like you, Marcus, you are such a good communicator. When we've shot together, you lay out your vision. You make it really easy to understand. I'm sure that when you're in a meeting and you've got when you've got a treatment or graphs or whatever, you're good at articulating it. And so I think that's one of my skills is that when I've gone into meetings or a Zoom call, I usually try to listen to what they say, but I'm still willing to, voice my opinion, express myself, share
yeah,
my vision of it, and try to get them to capture and understand my vision. Because if I can do that, then I'm succeeding. Then my
yeah,
creativity is gonna. And so I think that practicing that, and that's just communication, right?
yeah,
We oftentimes will, as photographers, will use or a filmmaker, you'll use a deck or a presentation or a PDF or whatever, a treatment to kind of showcase what you want to do. Oh, I want to go and make this film here. I want to go. And that's one tool. That's a great tool. Photos, video, whatever you have, and maybe some text. But it doesn't mean that you aren't going to have to sell this project through yourself.
yeah,
And so I think working on that elevator pitch, working on that quick Zoom call, what does that sound like? And that's
yeah.
important to work on.
No, and I really hear that and feel the same. We've had a few calls, like on a lot of these calls, we've also had that question to pop up, like how do I pitch? And I think that's something that a lot of people just think that, they can pitch and then like everybody says no. But I think it's a lot about like training. And then if you get no from a client, ask like,
Mhm,
what could I have done better? What are you guys looking for? Because I
mhm.
think that's also something with this, like dare to do it, but also dare to ask for feedback of how you can evolve, because it is as the same thing. Like, of course, you need a visual mood board, but what you're saying as well, which I think is super interesting, is that you got to train and evolve and really work on your storytelling to learn of like how do you
Well,
pitch to brands.
yeah, people think that storytelling, like, it just happens on the big screen, right? When it's
Yeah,
like, no, like, storytelling can happen on social media. It starts on social media. And here's the thing I wanna just, like, clear the air. Just because you're finding massive growth and success on social media doesn't mean that's going to translate to being hired as somebody who can direct a project or a crew or manage a photo shoot or anything like that. I have a lot of friends who have, crazy amounts of followers, but it doesn't necessarily translate to work because if they're doing the same thing over and over and over, what does that mean? I mean, to me, I think that practicing that, like you said, that experience of it, to me, it's like it's public speaking. It's also working on short films. Sometimes they're just personal projects that I'm funding myself. Working on books. All these things are forms of storytelling. And so if you want to become valuable um, as a storyteller, you have to kind of explore those things. I would say every person probably in this chat has a body of work that they could put into a book. I have self-published books. I have worked with big publishers. A book is one of the great ways to give somebody an example of your work, especially at like a creative agency or a branding agency. Like people still like physical things.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
there are some questions here, like from Sam. You've invested in create Sam Bugas. You've invested in creating the portfolio you're proud of. What is the essential step to begin showcasing it? Converting the vision that leads to opportunities. So
Yeah.
yeah, social media is one of them. I'm not going to spend any time on that because I think people get how it works. You just basically share it, you talk about it. But then also trying to get in front of agencies that represent these larger brands because there are certain levels of brands that utilize agencies. Usually it's the larger ones. And then there are certain ones that can't quite afford that. Um, and there's a difference there, right? So I'm talking about like maybe the Apples and the Abercrombies and whatever. So if you want them to see your portfolio, you want the art buyers to see your portfolio, you would have to either get a rep that's going to take your book to them, your book meaning your portfolio, or you are going to have to be bold enough to cold call them and say, I would like to take a meeting with one of your art buyers and show your book. And I'll tell you what, that is the most terrifying thing ever. It's terrifying. I've done it. I'm sure you've probably had experiences like that. Talk
Yeah.
about talk about feeling judged and evaluated. Like this career path is not for the lighthearted, is what I would say. And that's a painful experience because they're going to give you some probably really valuable feedback, but it is kind of nerve wracking.
Yeah, and especially also like you got to throw yourself out there and like dare to accept a no. Like you won't get a
Hmm.
yes every time, and I think that's
Yeah,
about just
yeah.
daring to go out there. I think Dong had a quite interesting question here, kind of leading up to what we talked about. Dong
Mhm.
Hawk, he said, "Could you share how you developed this storytelling ability and how it like influenced your approach to photography?"
Yeah. So I think starting my career editorially, and what I mean by editorially was like magazines. So there's editorial. I'm not trying to demean anybody, but some people don't understand. There's commercial work, which is like you're shooting assets for brands for marketing use, or you're being hired to shoot a campaign. And then there's editorial, which is usually magazine work. You're shooting, for Men's Journal or Outside or Surfer or whatever. So from my career started editorially, and usually it wasn't enough to come back with just like great action photos. I had to get portraits and landscapes and etc. and etc. and etc. And I think what I found was that really spoke to certain brands. Which brands? Patagonia was one of them. Like when early in my career, I started to submit to Patagonia. They actually accept spec shot images only. So like they don't hire out for shoots. They just will take images that photographers have shot on spec, and they have a very general submission guideline. You just have to send it in. So I was sending in images, and they were like, "Oh, we love this. It feels raw. It felt gritty. It felt like they were, looking at the photos from a magazine, but they still had their gear in them, if that makes sense. And so I think that that style, that kind of like photojournalistic, I know that's an overused word, so I'm sorry if anybody's repulsed by that, but photojournalistic style was really helpful in the beginning. To be honest, my style was probably too gritty in the beginning. And then when I started to shoot commercial work, I had to clean it up a little bit. And what I mean by clean it up is like I had to work on like a little more like lighting situations that kind of featured the product, and not everything could be a silhouette or shot at sunrise or sunset. And and that's a change for me. It's something I had to open my mind to, and so that was kind of an eye-opening experience. um, but yeah, I mean, that I think is sort of the way in which maybe I started that transition a little bit. um, and I think nowadays it's still really what I think about the most is like telling a story. It comes from this idea of like, well, I need to show the big picture, and then I think working on short films was really helpful. And I'm legitimately talking about like short 2-3 minute projects where we'd go on a surf trip somewhere, and we'd just hire a video guy to come film, and there would be a little story attached to it. But I think the thing that taught me the most, and maybe Marcus, you can give me your thoughts on this, but when I like published my first book, um, and again, I've self-published and I've worked with publishers, I realized so quickly all the moments I missed, because a book is never going to be that valuable if it's just photographs and there's no
Yeah.
words, right? And so I remember sharing, like, looking through the images of my first book and realizing, like, whoa, I missed so many in between moments that would have connected all of these ideas. And my first book was the California Surf Project. It was a 50-day road trip down the coast of California, just
Yeah.
shooting with a Canon 20D, which is probably shittier than my iPhone now. And I had like two lenses. But the point being is like, I really had to capture the people, the spirit, the ocean, the landscapes, and the surf. And so I think that storytelling, it combines all of those. You really have to look at things from like a 30,000-foot view in order to tell a more complete story. And so I think that when photographers go through the process of laying out their photos in InDesign, or starting to publish a book, or even like working on a catalog, you
Yeah.
start to realize like, whoa, we kind of overlooked this, and we maybe we didn't get that moment that would have been really helpful.
No, I think it was interesting. I listened to, I don't remember which, if it was one of the creative exchanges we've done with you or if it was a podcast, but you told me how you started in print and how you kind of learned like how the layouters work. So you kind of
Yeah,
know,
yeah,
what images are needed. And I think that's
mm,
the same, when we at DV work with photographers, like the people that have been working with web teams or with
mm,
print publishers, that it's so nice when they have an understanding also how to creatively lay out a
yeah,
story and also a shot for, okay, this is a great
r-
hero shot for the
yeah,
web, or this is a great hero shot
right,
for a double spread. And I think that's what caught me when you told me about it as well, because I
mm,
think that's so interesting of like, once you start working and training on laying out a book, or working on a
totally,
portfolio, you kind of understand what's needed and what are those
yeah,
in between images that are
right.
over often look the first times you do gigs or
What
work.
and this is such an important, this is like an ultra hack, like for me, like when I'm starting that process of talking to a brand and they want me to shoot something for them, I really like to understand, and I think you're really good at this, is where are these images going to be used? Because I remember the first time, this is maybe 12 years ago, I heard somebody say banner ad. And I'm like, what is a banner ad? And I'm trying to imagine it. They're like, oh, yeah, it's this very skinny ad that goes on the top of a website, and we're going to have a click through. And I was like, oh, okay, so I need to shoot a really panoramic image. And what I'm offering here is saying, like, if you're going on a shoot and everything you're shooting is just this like singular, this is the shot, this is the frame, there are many times where I have to compromise my creative integrity, because I know that although I love this frame with 35 millimeter and 20 feet away, I have to shoot a wider one. I have to shoot a vertical one. I have to shoot one with more foreground. I have to shoot one with more empty sky. Why would I want
Yeah.
empty sky? Because you need text, right?
Yeah.
And I find it really helpful. Like the photographers that I see that are really trained, they identify those needs, and or they communicate with the graphic designers and or the art directors on those shoots to know like that's what they need. And I think that those are the kind of assets you're usually looking for. So books help translate to that, right? And you want to be
Yeah.
successful on a commercial shoot by kind of giving all those things.
Yeah, and I guess that also leads back to also that has come up during the previous conversations at Creative Exchange, but I think shines through here as well. It's like understanding what the client needs, especially like when you're starting in photography. But I also then feel that it's good for people to dare to ask, like, what are you guys going to use the images for?
Yeah,
Where do
yeah,
you want them published?
hmm,
And what story do you want to tell?
yeah,
So you
and
can become even more creative within that
totally.
framework, right?
Well, and what it does, people don't realize is like when you kind of have these parameters to work within, it actually gives you more freedom as kind of the creative there, because then you know how far you can push it and how
Yeah.
far you can't. And this Sandra S, she's asking a great photo. How do you keep authenticity in these kinds of photos? To
Yeah.
me, I don't necessarily think that the authenticity comes from like shooting that exact image. I think it comes from the preparation. Where are you going? Who are you shooting with? What's the situation? What I really try to do is create a situation where authenticity can then thrive. I would appreciate anybody just like remembering that, writing it down, whatever, because that's what it's about. Like a lot of my best work has been about, okay, we're going to go here. We're going to actually do this activity. We're going to go surfing in the snow or whatever it is. Maybe the job is to shoot like a backpack or whatever, or a surfboard bag, right? But for example, I really want the moments before they go out and when they come in, and I want to see them cold. I want to see them, shivering. I want to see the the blood leaving their face, because all of those authentic aspects are what's going to translate to me a great product image. Now,
Yeah.
product photography is not my forte, but I'm just explaining here that like that's what I look for. And even with you, like we went and shot my bag collection for DB. We hiked deep into a canyon. We got our feet wet. We went and explored. Like we didn't just pull off on the side of the road and be like, okay, this is all we need. It's about like actually kind of going through those steps. And sadly, most commercial projects, they don't give you the time to do that, or they don't give you the talent, like the models sometimes
Yeah.
who are willing to do that. So it is a fine line, and
Yeah.
that's why when you find the fun brands to work with, you know how great it can be.
But you normally then, like when you have big clients that want, have a big production team, do you try to limit that and tell them like, hey, I will get more emotion, I will be better at storytelling if you just like trust me on, you know, give me 2 days of adventure and I will come back with so better, storytelling
Yeah,
and commercial
I mean,
images than if you kind of like, send
yeah,
me off with a
yeah.
location truck and on the side of the
Trust
road.
me,
Or how do you?
I mean, I am the king of going rogue. Like I have been on shoots for Apple and been like, the call time is 8 a.m. and the sun rises at 2 a.m. because you're in the north. And I'm like, I'm up shooting before everybody, or I'm like grabbing talent to go shoot something off the books because I know that that's when the best light is. And usually, if you're rubbing shoulders with like the art director or the producer, they're going to give you more leeway. But of course, there are aspects where you're doing a big project, you don't have that much flexibility, and that's really painful, to be honest. That's where I feel like the life force gets sucked out of it. And trust me, I've done a lot of shoots where I'm like, I'm just kind of there clicking the shutter, and I don't feel like I'm pouring a lot of my soul into it. And then I've done shoots where I'm very, very proud of it, and it oscillates. It's never the same. So there's some great, great questions in here. I really
Yeah,
appreciate.
that's
Yeah,
what I'm trying to. It
some
was
great,
harder than
awesome
I
stuff.
thought trying to moderate through my
Yeah, they're
phone
so
here.
good. I do
Um,
love. Yeah,
yeah, which
I
one
do love
do
this
you
one
want to
from Mike.
take? Yeah,
Mike has a good one. Mike Billadu. Awesome. The market is much more saturated and clicky now than when I first started. Yes. Would I approach launching my career differently in today's climate? If so, how? Um, to be honest, I don't really know. Like I would say that um, now the market is more challenging than ever. But I mean, this sounds like old fashioned, and maybe I'm showing my age here, but I do think that story will always win. I don't consider myself to be a great, talented portrait photographer, fashion photographer. What I'm getting at is there's a lot of genres that I don't think that I'm the best at. I think that as I've gotten older, I've recognized where my strengths are, and I've really tried to push into those strengths. Sometimes that's hurt me a little bit, so what I'm saying is that I guess if anything, I would have leaned into storytelling earlier than I would have now, because early in my career, I remember I was working for the surf magazines. I was traveling to places that I knew my editor would be happy and that photos would get run. All of a sudden, I became so disenchanted with that, and I started to look up places like Iceland and Norway and Russia and Kuril Islands, et cetera, to go shoot stories. And I wasn't getting the support, but I was like pushing it hard to do it, and that benefited me massively. So I guess what I'm saying is risk has always benefited me massively in my career. It's also hurt me a lot, and I'm okay. I'm comfortable saying that. But like I've never been a fan of um, being too risk averse when it comes to like taking projects or challenges in within photography and storytelling. And I think that's something I wish I would have done earlier, because there was a lot of moments where I maybe played it safe, and I don't think people find success playing it safe. Or at least the success they do find, I don't know that that's super fulfilling, or at least it wasn't fulfilling to me. So that's probably the way I would have started. I would have kind of leaned into that more. Like I also think that I hope and I pray that people, when they start this career path, they realize that it should take time. Like I didn't find success for years. It wasn't something where it all came all of a sudden. It was like 5, 6, 7 years before I felt like I was actually understood my style genre, where I started to kind of like find progression and help, and that it takes time.
Yeah, it does. And I think it kind of just comes back to this part of like specializing and storytelling,
So
like,
yeah,
and it feels like it's always been that, but just in, if I
and
understand you right,
yeah,
and from the different talks, it's just changed the platforms and how you tell
right.
stories.
Right.
Do you agree
So
on that?
totally. And if specialization and storytelling, I mean, these are my pillars. Again, this is just
Yeah.
the world according to Chris. You can throw it out with a grain of salt, people. I don't care. But I would say if specialization and storytelling are key pillars, then I would say collaboration is the other one. And what I mean by that is like I remember again when I made my first book, California Surf Project. I remember vividly, I was so dead set on it looking a certain way and being a certain way. And I remember going into these meetings with Chronicle and just like, beating in my ideas. And my ideas sucked. And their graphic designers were much better than I was. And I was not a graphic designer. Their editors knew what they were talking about. What I'm getting at here, I mean, this seems obvious, but learning to collaborate. It's kind of like that idea of, feeling like you can edit something yourself, a video, versus working with a talented editor, because you're going to be so attached to everything you're filming, everything you're shooting. It's going to be so hard to
Yeah.
take things out of the story. It's so important to have a fresh set of eyes. And so I think collaboration, hey buddy, collaboration in terms of how you are editing your images, seeking out a third party editor to kind of go through your selections, that's really helpful. Also,
Yeah.
seeking out a maybe a third party video editor to kind of edit through some of the video pieces you're making. There's a lot of ways in which I think we can seek out that collaboration, but even for me early on, it was always working with a writer, a surf journalist,
Yeah.
who was the one who was basically kind of helping me to like craft these stories and everything like that. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Awesome. Perfect. Yeah.
Is he asking if you want food, or is it food dinner time over there now?
It's almost food o'clock. No, it's almost a sauna o'clock. But I would say
That's
like
nice.
I said in the beginning,
Yeah.
working with journalists, because I
Yeah.
recognized immediately like I'm not a good writer, and I needed to work with a journalist, and my stories went 10 times as far and went 10 times deeper than I ever would imagine. So I think that pairing up with people is, I guess, what I'm saying
Yeah.
is important, right?
Yeah. I guess finding somebody that fills out the gaps where you feel that you're lacking, or that can really
Yeah.
help pitch in a story or
Yeah,
a
or
theme.
seeking mentorship if you can find that. I mean, I really find it important, critically important for people nowadays that are in any form of creative space to not seek all their validation from social media, because
Yeah.
you need to have some people who maybe aren't in your echo chamber,
Yeah.
who aren't in your court even, like, it's important to go and put your work in front of art directors, people who have different opinions, styles, who can kind of tell you that stuff sucks sometimes. And I appreciate those. In
Yeah.
nowadays, in my position, I feel like I get less of that. So I have to look pretty far to get like an opinion where someone's like, dude, this isn't your best work. And I seek it out. And I know that
Yeah.
the people that I really admire, they seek that out a lot.
How have you gone your way of trying to find, mentors or people, throughout your career? Because it kind of also changes, or for at least me, I've always thought that's been super important, finding mentors, people to look up to, always looked up to your work as well. So, been following that part. But like, how have you gone your way to find mentors in different stages?
Mm.
When you start out, you're kind of shy. It's maybe not the easiest. And then later in
Yeah.
your career, I guess you are stuck in a larger like circle of confirmation bias, so you
Yeah.
need to go further. So like, can you
You
please tell me
do.
a bit like of how you did when you were just starting up, what kind of people you found and
Yeah.
how you went your way, and then later in your career?
Mentorship is sort of like this, it's like this vague cloud that kind of lives over everybody. Like everybody's seeking it out. Nobody really knows where to go to find it. It's tricky, it's challenging. I remember I had a handful of mentors in my career. One of them was a large format landscape photographer, Michael Fatali. And to be honest, I left that. It wasn't a mentorship. I kind of shadowed him for a little period of time. I left that mentorship, that shadowing, feeling so disappointed, so bummed, feeling so kind of shitty about myself because I knew that what he did, I didn't have the patience for, the equipment for, and I wasn't going to wallow in the fact that, like, oh, this isn't my privilege, blah, blah. It was just the fact that he was at a different stage in his career. And I dreamed of emulating him. But I knew that the most valuable thing I learned from that mentorship is that that was not the step I was going to take
Yeah.
to pursue this career. And so sometimes this is the challenging thing. People expect that mentorships are like stepping stones to a beautiful career. It doesn't mean that. Sometimes you can go and be like, "Wow, I don't want to do that," or "That's way more challenging than I thought," or now that everything's been pulled, the veil's been pulled back. Now I see how real that is. When I've had interns over the years, that's in the beginning, I wanted them to like see me in the perfect light. This is Chris, like everything's great. But I realized that that was so dishonest, and I really wanted to start showing people what it means to like have the stress that I have and or have to manage these things. And I think that that level of honesty is what a real mentor should give you. I had one named Pete Terrace who worked at Trans World Surf. He was the photo editor, and I went there and to be an assistant photo editor for a number of years. That was an invaluable experience. It taught me how the magazine worked. It taught me how to look for images, but it was a grind. I mean, I was not out shooting anything. I was staring at images, adding metadata for like 4 months. I would drive from my house in San Luis Obispo down to Oceanside, 5 hours on a Monday, sleep in my truck every day, and in the parking lot, and then drive back. Point being is like it's not going to be a dreamy experience, and if you're seeking that, I would really reimagine it. People that come to me asking for an internship, I really try to sit them down and be like, this is what it's going to be. I just want you to realize that. And if you leave inspired, great. If you leave feeling like, wow, that's not for me, that's even better
Yeah.
advice. I think that's the key. And again,
Yeah.
I'm just kind of giving you this caveat. Like, mentorship is not always what we make it out in our heads. And
Yeah.
I hope more people seek it out, but I hope they seek it out in a way that's like, I'm going to learn from this no matter what, because the learning can and will happen. It's a matter of how you take it. And I think
Yeah.
if you set unrealistic expectations, you're never going to get out of it what you want.
Yeah, 100%. And I think also like, once again, coming back to what you talked earlier about, as well as daring, like dare to reach out. Like for me, when I've been searching for, other photographers who I look up to, or now when, I'm on the in-house side on DB instead, I look up to,
Mm.
people that are creative directors or brand directors. And it's the same thing, like dare to text the brand, dare to reach out, like
Yeah,
dare to ask the social media manager, who then tells their boss to
dude,
tell their boss to like go hunt people down, dare to ask,
totally.
and you will get no's. It's the same thing with, showing your portfolio. But I think for a lot of people, just dare, and also be ready to work really hard, because that's what
Yeah.
I've noticed, with a lot of your work and a lot of other photographers and art directors and things we work with, is like
Mm.
how hard they have worked, and that does not always
Oh,
shine through the social media, and
totally.
it looks like you're on
I'll say,
vacation all the time.
I
I'm
mean, I
just kidding.
totally agree. I agree. And the one thing I'll say is like, you have to be a high level psychopath to not enjoy and love the fact that when people are reaching out to you, wanting to work with you, that's a huge compliment. Like
Yeah,
I feel honored always. Um, and I will say that most of the people, almost every single one that I work with now, whether I'm hiring for video work or has worked in my office or has assisted me on photo shoots, I have met them from social media.
yeah,
And I think that the key thing here is that I use social media as a tool to connect with people because that's what it is for me, and that's what
yeah,
it's always been about. Now, I guess what I'm getting at is like, to your point, just dare to reach out, dare to like try and see what's possible. The beauty of these tools we have is that you're like 20 thumb clicks away from usually reaching somebody in the marketing department of any company or brand.
yeah,
That's unprecedented. So to me, when people say like, "Oh, the industry's changed, everything's different," I'm like, "Dude, do you know how it was 20 years ago? Do you know how tight knit the community was, the photo community? Do you when I was reaching out for people to learn from, to intern from, I would send out like 80 emails every Monday morning and get zero responses. And a lot
yeah,
of times just like a one line response, usually from like Nat Geo photographers or people I looked up to. And they'd be like, sorry, no. I'm like, we live in such a different time.
yeah,
Usually the most valuable photographers or the most valuable creatives are the most open ones, the most willing to share, the most willing to pull back the veil and kind of give people a piece of what this looks like. And I just think like, I guess, maybe I'm a little jaded, but I feel like when people are like, "Oh, the industry's so shit," well, I'm like, dude, it's never been easier to make your mark.
yeah,
Yeah, you have to work a little different to like harder to stand out, but like you can share something that the entire world can see like from your phone. That's crazy. We used to have
yeah.
to rely always upon the brand or the magazine or whatever it is. So sorry, that was like a
No,
little diatribe there. But
I know, but I think it's great and so interesting how you see it, because I think it's always like you find these things where people complain about how things have turned, but it's all about like figuring out, how do I use this in a creative way to suit where
right.
I want to go and the
Yeah.
stories I want to tell, or you know,
Mhm.
I think that's super interesting. I James and a few other
Yeah.
in the comments here, it's popped up a question on the backside of social media, so I thought I'd take that now when we're closing into the
Mhm.
end with a few extra ones, but just covering kind of the backside of social. So, do you feel responsibility when covering destinations to protect their anonymity to a degree, or we talked about this before, but
Mm,
new crowd here. So,
mm.
in order to preserve their current environment, and how does that factor into your decision making and your process of like to present
Absolutely.
a destination in a
Mm.
or a perspective, because I guess you just now came from a flight and you've been working for tourism boards, for example.
Mhm.
So how do you balance
I've
that of
I've
like,
worked yeah, I've worked for tourism boards for probably about 10, 12 years. I've shot a ton of
yeah,
tourism. I have, my own moral code that I try to implement. I'm not going to say again, this is the world according to Chris, you can do whatever you want. But ultimately, I think that to me, a big part is just knowing the situation that maybe countries are going through. When I'm
yeah,
working on tourism in Iceland, I'm very, very aware of tourism, how it affects people, how it affects rural communities. And I know that everywhere in the world, tourism needs to be managed better. But usually, tourism is kind of at the other end of the pendulum from extractive industries. And that sounds extreme, but in Iceland, it's either fishing, geothermal energy export by way of or energy export by way of dams and wind farms, and that is the solution to creating more economy, or tourism. So to me, the beauty is like, what does tourism support? It supports nature, right? It supports the preservation of nature. It just needs better management. And this story that I'm telling you, it's the same everywhere. I was lucky enough to speak on behalf of the environmental branch of the government in Iceland and talk about tourism and the effects of it. I'm pretty well versed in it. When I go share a tourism experience, I really try to be conscious of like, what message are we sending? How will this impact communities? I want people to go see the beauty of this country, but I know that if they just spread out a little more, seek a little further, I think the most dangerous thing to tourism usually is social media, but it's not so much the act of taking a picture. It's that people get in their mind this checklist, this idea that, oh my God, if I go there and I don't see this and this and this and this, my trip is going to suck. And I feel like they strip away the mystery of the experience, like all of the excitement of that, what you could see that you don't know about is gone because you
Yeah.
kind of already set an expectation. So to me, tourism with less expectations, slower, more thoughtful tourism that actually goes into those rural communities and spends time with them. I think that seeking out local guides is always really important because you'll have a better experience, but also because you're going to learn more from those guides because they know about the place. If you ever have the choice of like staying at like a mom and pop Airbnb or a farm stay versus a big hotel that's not even owned by a person in that country, I would always opt for that farm stay. So there's little things that people can do. There's a lot of little things. And I have my own checklist. I wish I could go over it in detail, but I think about that a lot. And I will say that globally, these are things that you cannot expect the tourism bureau or like the airline or anything like that, anything that they're promoting to necessarily be the best thing for that place. You really have to do your research, and I just try to do my research, and it's actually
Yeah.
why I've decided to go back to places and spend more time, be more involved, be more invested than just getting that dopamine hit of going to a new place every time I travel.
Yeah, and I think that was super interesting when you told us about that at the Creative Exchange in London, of just
Yeah,
like how you actually traveled less to actually be able to tell better stories, and
yeah.
and I guess that's been the case for Iceland, for example, and when you now go to US for
Yeah.
longer episodes.
Yeah, I mean, and and I think that it just gives you the perspective of knowing, like when I've traveled to Norway or when I've traveled to parts of Russia, like there are these beautiful places that you kind of just want to hone in on and like, extrapolate the good stuff because it's going to take investment, time, energy to find those.
Yeah, I get it. I get it. And then let's. Naomi had a really good question that we can kind of end off with,
Yeah.
and that is also the balance between work and also experiencing. So she is also
Mm.
like, how easy is it for you to put the camera down and make space for internal memories? I guess the question
Mm.
is, how do you ground yourself away from the camera from work, essentially?
It's an excellent question. I think it kind of comes back to that very first thing that I was saying, which is like, as a creative, you are giving of yourself all the time, whether it's for
Yeah.
clients or whether you have to be on, if you know what I mean, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that it's important to consider if photography, we're just going to use photography as an example. If photography is if it's your joy, if it's your job, if it's your pleasure, if it's all those things wrapped up into this one device, that's super complicated to me. I think that it's important to have other ways of experiencing places. And then photography gets to be that one expressive modality. But I remember Michael Fatali, again, the first person I mentored for. One of the things I loved about him, he was a large format landscape photographer that shot 8 by 10 film. His sheets of film were this big, right? So he would go deep into the backcountry and he would have maybe 3, 4 sheets of film. And I remember talking to him about this, and I would be like, dude, how do you go there? And you're in this sick place where the light is, shafting through some slot canyon. How do you not just want to shoot it all the time? How do you wait? Or how do you know when the light is right? And he kind of told me, he's like, well, I really try to express myself in other ways. Maybe I'll like write a poem about it. Maybe I'll sing a song. Maybe I'll journal about it. Maybe I'll take a couple photos with my phone. And I think that forced delay, like, it's so easy to approach a scene, and the first thing we do is we start filtering it through the camera. And
Yeah.
as somebody who has done that in my youth, and it didn't really serve me well, I've learned to try to embrace the experience, to do more research beforehand, so I'm a little more prepared, a little more ready, And then when I do absorb these places, I feel like it's not being hurled at me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's kind of like, you come to Iceland, your first trip, you're shooting photos out the window, driving 60 miles an hour. And then by day number 10, you're like, I've already seen that waterfall. I don't care. So how do you kind of desensitize yourself to some of the beauty to really let the story kind of permeate? And I think that's it takes time. It's all I would say is it takes time, takes energy, takes kind of meditating on the experience. To me nowadays, I feel like I the only thing I can attribute to myself is that I've been able to put the camera down more and seek more experience, and then pull the camera out when it really means something.
Yeah. I guess I guess that comes with experience as well, kind of that like in the beginning you kind of notice on your memory card as well, like when you
Yeah,
start shooting you're always like shooting everything, and then you kind of with
right.
experience with jobs you kind of learn as you go.
Well, and I self edit, so I'm always thinking like, could I have shot this scene, without taking 30 photos? Could I have taken 3 and
Yeah.
gotten the same results? Now, when you're shooting for a commercial client, it's different. Sometimes you need to shoot a ton, and that's okay. But I think when it comes down to shooting for myself, or shooting on spec, or shooting a portfolio, I really try to think about that. Like, what are all the elements? Slowing down the process and just
Yeah.
giving the places more time. I'd rather go to like 3 places and spend 3 times the amount of time than go to 10 places quickly. And I think that's kind of part of it.
Yeah. And I guess that also kind of becomes true when you travel to Iceland, when you see like all these people rushing to the same tourist spots and
Yeah, and you see
experiencing the
this.
same thing.
I
And
mean, you see it all over the world. But you see people
yeah,
going to the next spot, going to the next spot, and sometimes I like to force myself. I'm like, I'm not leaving this area until I shoot something I'm proud of. I don't care
yeah,
if it's new. I don't care if it's noon. I'm gonna shoot something I'm proud of.
because it was kind of, when you and me, you took us out to Thorsmark.
Yeah,
We were
yeah, yeah,
shooting Chris' campaign in Iceland. And I think like
yeah,
that's a place you kind of really need to go quite far to get to, but
yeah.
you get away from the crowds and it's so beautiful.
Mm,
So when we took a few from the DB family who won a photo competition to Iceland, instead of showing all these like classic sites,
yeah,
I think it was a way more like immersive experience to actually
mm,
like go on a proper mission and feel
yeah.
something and experiencing something deeper than just like doing these
Totally.
classic pit stops.
And I've also found that giving yourself an objective as a photographer, as a creative, is super helpful. Like, and I know we're kind of overtime here, but
Yeah,
if I was, if I was giving myself advice to my younger self, and say my younger self was going to go backpack through Europe or whatever it was, and I had a camera, I would tell myself, create an assignment. Shoot a photograph of every chef that you eat with, or take a picture of the owner of every Airbnb, or whatever
yeah,
it is. Take
yeah,
a photo of every baguette. But or if you're going to go to Iceland, tell yourself, well, I'm going to take a photo in every town, or I'm going to circle around the country, or I'm going to drive from the North Ocean to the South Ocean, take a photo of both, and I'm going to create a photo set that shows. So I think it's not hard to work on portfolios. It just takes that little bit of extra time and energy to kind of collaborate with yourself. Like, what is the story I want to tell? How can I make this more objective based? And then
yeah.
you kind of have to fulfill that objective, which I think is really cool.
I think that's I think that's a great kind of, tip to round off with. Like
Yeah.
actually create your own missions if you want to build your portfolio, if you want to go somewhere,
Yeah.
if you want to go
Yeah.
deeper into your
Well,
storytelling,
well, it
photography or
looks
videography.
totally, and it looks a lot better if on your website you had like, Iceland east to west, instead of just
Yeah.
like like a random photo set, because it doesn't mean anything. And when you're
Yeah.
showing an art director your work, they want to see something that's kind of complete. They don't
Yeah.
just want to see highlights. They want to see something complete. And so I think about things like, this comes back to storytelling. This comes back to seeing all the small pieces. Try to think in a more complete package. And that's really helpful.
Yeah, perfect. So I want to round this up. I want to thank everybody
Yeah,
for
you guys
listening
are the
in.
legends. Thank you.
It is the first time on YouTube. It was a great test. I think we're going to continue. We got already great feedback. We just got to figure out how we can invite 2 more people and do it well. But I would love people to kind of go into the comments on DB's Instagram and just like, or send us a DM with like feedback. How can we do these creative exchanges better? Do you have
We
any
can do it in
questions? We're gonna
person.
Yes,
That's how we can
like
make it better. Do it in person.
change
Yeah.
Marcus and Chris out. That was catastrophic. No, but please give us feedback. Also,
Mm,
we are going to pop on to more calls with
mm.
you, Chris. So if you guys have any more questions for Chris, please DM us. We will
Yeah.
collect them. We'll do a new talk. If you have any other people you would like us to have on
Oh.
these calls, please let
I
us know.
I have a suggestion, Marcus. I think it'd be really cool for me and a couple people on the DB team, like the photo team, to talk about training,
Yeah,
specifically like training physically for photo expeditions or assignments. Because I know that there's a lot of action sports photographers, myself,
yeah,
people in this thread down here. Sometimes you're swimming in a pool with a housing. Sometimes you're going ski tour. I think that's fascinating, and it's something that I've
yeah,
been passionate about. Maybe we can do one that's kind of focused on that, talking
yeah.
about the
I think
regiment. Yeah,
that would be super cool, especially like how do you shoot with surf and how do you train for
yeah,
that and your
yeah,
ski expeditions, and I think
yeah,
also your bike expeditions because it's a lot of
yeah.
physical training. What gear should
It's
you
yeah,
pack? I think it's
yeah.
great.
Cool,
And then we
awesome.
had one more that I just want to say here. Ashima, you asked for a couple off the beat places in Iceland that you can
Yeah,
recommend. And you know what? Chris, maybe you have one to end with, but I also want to
yeah.
recommend Chris's maps on Rexby.
Oh
So
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I actually think it's good. In all honesty, like when I went to Iceland, I used both Ossa's and yours to
Mhm.
find good locations. And there's so many good,
So many good
actually
ones.
like
Yeah,
off the beaten track
yeah.
recommendations there
So
in that map as well.
yeah, so my personal recommendation to Ashima, who wrote a good comment, would
Yeah.
be go to the East Fjords. If you were going to come to Iceland, people get scared because they realize that the East and the West are like 5 and 8 hours from Reykjavik, and a lot of times what happens is those places people kind of avoid them because they're so far. I would spend all my time in Borgarfjordur Estre, all the way down to Eskifjordur, which is like 6 different fjords in the east. And why it's special is because you're going to see puffins, you're going to see hot springs, you're going to have these crazy hikes that go out to these places. And these communities, they need tourists. Like people gave up the farm in order to build an Airbnb, hoping that people would come, and then people see the distance and they don't go. So if you want to have a real, raw, authentic experience, avoid the tourists. That's where I would go. And I think those are the most special places, being able to stay at someone's house, find local advice on where the coolest, hike or hot spring is. And if
Yeah.
it was me, if yeah, and if I do have a guide and my guide is sick, but there is a place that nobody's going to be able to spell, but it's called Storuth, Storud with the symbol, and that's this crazy hike in the east that is probably the most beautiful place I've been in. It's worth going. So thank
Uh,
y'all. Yeah,
Text me the name of that place. So
I will.
if anybody didn't manage to get the notes, just send DB a DM and
Yeah,
we'll we'll
for
send it
sure.
over so
Yeah,
we have it on record because I guess
yeah,
we're going to be a bunch of people traveling there soon.
yeah. Nice,
But
cool.
Chris, super appreciate you popping on once again.
Hmm.
It's always very fun having chat and learning from your advice and your experiences. So
Yeah,
thank you from the DB team and I guess everybody in the comments.
yeah. Cheers.
Hey, enjoyed the sauna. Let's see how we log out from this thing. Ciao.